Go for it.
All right. Hey, everybody. It is Monday, February 3rd, 2020. I'm hanging out with Serene and Lucas, and Lucas snuck in a quick question before we even had a chance to say hello, because he's going to be a little bit busy with some stuff. He's running around, but he was asking about electronic signatures and their veracity. He had asked about this in the Google group, and Serene, who has some experience in this world, reinforced what I had said, which is that first of all, with all legal matters, consult your legal counsel. I'm not a lawyer, and laws differ from state to state, from town to town. So it's always helpful to get local support from an expert. And you can, hopefully you find somebody with legal expertise locally that can either give you a little bit of pro bono help, or you could do some kind of a trade, or that you can pay them when you need them. But generally speaking, my understanding is electronic signatures for like membership agreements are just as good as paper signatures. And that my presiding advice that I got from a lawyer in general is that for stuff like this, that's really kind of detailed technicality stuff, if somebody's challenging you on the veracity of an electronic signature versus a paper one, then you're already in trouble, because it means somebody's trying to find a way to get at you. And our best defense in avoiding legal situations is not letting things get to the point where the technicalities of these things become an issue. So we have actually, I will recap, we have talked about this a while back in the past about dealing with potentially legally sticky situations that people have gotten into, and what people's legal recourses are and all of that stuff. And my experience, having kind of been adjacent to situations like this in the past, is that diplomacy is the best way. You always try to find a way to resolve things without the lawyers. You try to find a way to de-escalate, and if it involves doing a lot of listening, a lot of really careful learning of how to communicate and trying to work things out, you just do everything that you can to try to de-escalate situations. And most people are not litigious and they want to avoid these things. Some people are, but even then you try to do what you can. Yeah, go for it.
I'm going to have to go on. Thank you, Tony.
Thanks,
see you guys.
Thank you, Lucas.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Were you going to say something, Serene?
Yeah, I think you have, we're in the people business, and being in the people business, what you're ultimately managing are expectations. And even if you have one set of rule or something in the contract that everybody signs, it's more than likely people will, it won't quite fit their expectation or interpretation of what that document states. And it is definitely a great idea to check in with legal counsel, as well as understanding how human beings operate, and that ultimately what they're looking for is to be satisfied in whatever expectation they had. So as you ferret the expectation, you'll understand the upset, and it just comes down to resolving that upset. Now some may take it to the extreme of some, suing you or something, or attempting to, which sucks, I'm sure. But yeah, I think that you're on to something there, because if it's usually people who open workshare spaces are all about people, I'm assuming, right? Do you ladies agree? You're people? Yeah. I just love what you're saying. I can sit here and talk all day.
Well, I'm glad. I think it's an important topic. It's one we don't talk about often, but in general. So, hey, Jen and Penny, by the way, we started talking about legal stuff because Lucas had this question about electronic signatures. It's a very innocent question, but it leads to this larger topic, I think, that comes up in various contexts around dealing with people and dealing with exposure to liability and legal challenges to your work. And I think, unlike a lot of other things, if we were a mastermind group of like people building their like online businesses to sell their books or something, like we're really not worrying about lawsuits. We're really not worrying about dealing with stuff like this. And hopefully in co-working, we're not really worrying about it much either. And actually, in the 12 plus years I've been in this, almost 13 years I've been in this world, I've not heard about a lot of legal action happening in co-working world. There's been some, but there haven't been any like crazy blockbuster situations. And even the ones that have existed, I think have been very, very much the exception. However, there is a risk because we're dealing with human beings in a physical, real life space where they can be injured and where they can injure each other and where they can commit crimes, right? I mean, if there's somebody working in your space who is doing nefarious business things in your space, you know, I mean, it's not out of the question that a law enforcement person would come and start asking you questions. And so there are, you know, things that we have to be aware of when coming into the world of sharing physical space and being the proprietor of that physical space. And again, we hope that this never ever becomes an issue. And the vast majority, in my mind and in my experience, of doing this well and avoiding legal situations has come down to setting yourself up to avoid bad situations from as early on as possible. And that means being careful about who you bring on as a customer in the space and the onboarding process, which is not to say that it's necessarily a private application process. There are implied ways to curate membership. One of them is through the price that you charge, which is a factor. And then among a number of other processes. So you can, you know, essentially if you're like, I was opposed to having a application process. I wanted to be very welcoming to people. I didn't want to come off as exclusive. And we still were able to maintain a good culture, you know, with a few annoying exceptions, but we were able to keep the ship floating, you know. And then the way that you cultivate culture and conversation.
You didn't have an application? Tony, you didn't have an application?
No.
Okay.
No. You know, if I were to build a new co-working space from scratch today, I would do it differently. Which is not to say that I would make it purely exclusive, but I would be very careful and proactive about how I curate how people are able to become members at various levels. So it might be that you could come in off the street and buy a day pass, but to become a member and to gain certain privileges, there's certain levels of participation that you need to kind of qualify for. And actually, sorry, go ahead, Penny.
I'm working on that now, and I do feel kind of awkward about it because I want to be, you know, open and welcoming, but then at the same time, I definitely don't want to have any crazy therapists working here or therapists that can kind of undermine the whole group or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, and you've talked about, and I've heard other people talk about how co-working spaces really can be self-selective. Like people who want to join often are a pretty good match.
Yeah.
But at the same time, given that in this co-working space, it can be so valuable to people to be a member here because it's so much cheaper than starting a private practice out someplace and having to sign a 2-year lease, that I can get those people who are interested for those reasons, just for the financial reason, rather than the ones who are interested because of the whole community, which is what I'm really trying to. Anyway, so I'm in the middle of all that right now. I do have an application. I am using it, but I feel kind of awkward because we came up with a process that they have to apply, they have to come to at least one event, and then I do put their names in front of the other therapists and just say, you know, message me privately if you have an issue with this person. And so far, nobody has messaged me privately, but I would like to at least, if there's somebody who's just a well-known kind of troublemaker, then I would at least want to think a second time about having them come in.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's a lot you can do here. And that's part of why one of the many reasons I advocate so strongly for a participatory onboarding process. You know, so I've seen so many co-working spaces, and to some extent I even fell into this myself, where, you know, essentially if somebody walks in and says, I want to rent a desk, here's my money, and you say, great.
You're like, great.
Here you go. Right. But, you know, it's kind of the equivalent of like getting a 5-bedroom apartment and going on Craigslist and just saying, you know, it's $1,000 each. Who wants to live here? And it's like, whatever you get is what you get. And like, that's, you know, it's going to predictably lead to, at the very least, a bunch of people that don't talk to each other. But at worst, you know, a bunch of people that are going to really not get along. So if we added some very simple layers to this, where we say past a certain membership level, you can't sign up unless you've come to an event. Like you can only sign up after you've come to one of our events, right? Which is not a huge barrier. But if somebody just walks in and like, listen, I don't care about any of this community crap you guys are doing. I just want an office. And you're like, totally fine. I totally understand. Listen, the thing is just, to rent a desk here, you have to come and join for one of our events. So if you're down for that, here's our upcoming lunch and learn. Here's our happy hour. Here's our Taco Tuesday. Like pick any of these and just let us know which one you want to come to. We'll expect you. I'll buy your tacos. If you want to be our friend, we'll be your friend. And if they're like, no, I'm not interested. Awesome, good riddance, right? Now, if you're losing thousands of dollars a month because you're desperate for members, it's going to be pretty hard for you to put up that barrier. But if that person comes in and scares people away, it's going to cost you more than it gains you in the long term. So, it's a constant judgment call. It's definitely a work in progress, but it's one that we can be thinking about. Yeah, Serene?
When it comes to cultivating community, it does make a huge difference in ensuring that you invite the right person in that has that mindset, at least in the beginning and as you're growing something. Because as human beings, we tend to go with our own belief systems and kind of create cliques that way. So when you have an equal amount of people who don't really care much about the community and then people who really are trying to cause something with community, then you begin falling into some kind of tug of war and the whole intention gets thwarted. Because I'm sure Penny, you're trying to create a community for a particular community vibe for a purpose. Yeah. What is it?
They're psychotherapists. And so so it's called Thrive Therapy Space. And the idea is to create a place where therapists themselves can thrive, right? So we do want to have the lunch and learns, but we have what we call peer supervision or case consultation. I do a mindful morning for the therapist to help learn more about mindfulness. So it's really about creating a place where therapists themselves feel welcome, seen, heard. That way the therapists themselves are healthy.
Yeah, that's a big deal in that field for sure.
Well, for sure. And so many therapists end up feeling isolated, right? They're off practicing someplace alone, or they're in a hallway and there's other therapists and they really never talk to each other except to say hi. And of course, it's really good, like in any field, like what we're doing right here, right? I mean, this is a supportive environment. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
And so it's all important and necessary. And I think it's hopefully a new model in our entire field.
That's brilliant. I love it. And I'm sure when there's even that one person, you have a group of 10 and you have one person that is not really doing the talking or generating conversations or in the community, it sucks so much energy out. And it becomes a contrast to what's being created. And just kind of like how they say one bad review it takes 10 good reviews or 100 good reviews to eliminate a bad one or something like that, right? It's that's so interesting, man. And we have to really, what you said, Tony, had me get present to, like, we're cultivating and we need to keep that space sacred to some degree in accordance to our vision. Otherwise, people will take it in their own direction. Yeah. I don't, that's all.
Tony, we can't hear you. It's an alchemy because like people will take it in their own direction, and we want to do our best to kind of direct that energy, knowing that we don't control it, but we don't have no influence over it either. And so any kind of culture change that happens in a co-working space before it launches or after it launches, sometimes like I did it long enough where I could see my culture be great and then degrade over time just due to lack of engagement on my part and everybody's part. And then I realized, I wake up one day and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm sitting in a room full of people that aren't talking to each other and we're all strangers. And then we have to figure out what to do to get that culture to be back up to a place where it is endemic in the space. It comes back to conversations. And so it always comes back to those conversations, just one-on-one, one to few, which is why it's nice to have that tradition of some kind of regular ritualistic lunch or happy hour or dinner, and if there were, maybe you've been in business for a few years, maybe there's a few members who backed you before you even opened. the ones who prepaid their membership or backed your Kickstarter or whatever, like maybe you can keep going to lunch with those people and like not necessarily keep it a clique, but every now and then just get them out together and have that cultural core. Because like Penny, what you said about like the mission of like creating a space for therapists, right? For them to be healthy is important, and it's a good one. And I'm sure you're not the only one who loves that idea. So, you know, if it's just you saying it and nobody else gets it, it's not going to work. But if you know that there are other people that when you say it, their eyes light up and they're like, oh my God, yes, I want to support this, then that person is really critical, because they're going to repeat the same language and the same attitudes that you are. And if we have enough of those people, you only need a few people to really, really carry the torch, because then every one of them radiates around them like some influence, right? And so you only need like 10% of your members or something, right, to be like really, really philosophically deeply bought in, because then everyone else will kind of buy in just by association. And, you know, what ends up happening is that if somebody comes in who is inclined to be disruptive, they are walking into a room of people that have all committed to behaving a certain way, and they're either going to adapt or they're going to move on. And I've seen that. I've taken on members where we specifically were like, we really don't like this guy. We really don't like this guy. We don't like his attitude, his questions, like everything about him tells us he's going to be a terrible member, but he's not technically doing anything that would cause us to deny him membership. We don't have a technical reason to deny him. And we have long meetings, the whole staff, about this one guy. And we're like, what do we do about this guy? And I said, look, this is a chance for us as a community to really reinforce our cultural norms. And if he violates them, we will be very much on top of communicating that in the moment in a way that's, you know, compassionate and friendly and whatever, but firm. You know, so if we say like 2-hour limit on the conference rooms, and if we fully expect he's going to try to use the conference rooms more than 2 hours, at 2:01, we're going to like be like, hey, just so you know, it's a 2-hour thing. If you need more than that, just let us know, because we, you know, blah, blah, blah. And like, if he gets belligerent, then we throw him out. If he gets out of the conference room, then he can stay. And he was
the other point about that, Tony, is the clearer you are on what the culture norms are and expectations, the more likely it is that somebody's going to get it. And if you're kind of mamby-pamby or kind of wishy-washy about it, then people aren't going to catch on to it anyway. But when you're super clear about it, and then when somebody violates it once or twice and you call them to task and bring them right back in a kind way, they just may kind of step up and take notice and start to actually belong there.
Yes. And so this is actually one thing that I'm working my way towards in this conversation. I think it's really important, Penny. So the co-working movement has the 5 core values, which you can learn about coworking.org. Community, openness, collaboration, accessibility, sustainability.
Wait, what is it again?
Sorry, I rushed through this. Coworking.org. So coworking is a movement. It was created by a bunch of us over the course of many years in open conversation in public on the internet. You can go to the Coworking Google group. The Coworking forum, it transitioned from Google. And you can get to that from coworking.org. There was a Coworking wiki where we created and shared all these free resources amongst us. And so the word coworking is a household name today because it was created as an open source movement. And part of what allowed that movement to become such an awesome, amazing, beautiful, big deal is because it developed a set of core values. And so those core values are on the website. There are articles about it. You could go back in the old Google group and find threads where we talked about what the values were and added a new value and all of that stuff. They are valuable and they're useful. I would say that they're a little bit loose. They're a little bit open to interpretation, but they're a nice starting point. And what I recommend is that every co-working space implement its own sense of what values are to them. They could say, like, we ascribe to the co-working movement values, and these are specifically ours. But I will also say in my study of communities over the last year, beyond co-working, I've learned about other really awesome things that communities have. Like they will have, I forget what some of the other languages, but they'll have, so like in Alcoholics Anonymous, and there are many, many derivations of the 12-step programs, they have the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, which helps you get sober and transform your life. But they also have the 12 traditions. And the 12 traditions manage the organization of Alcoholics Anonymous as a decentralized entity. So every AA meeting is actually a independent, autonomous group. There is like a central steering entity, but every group has its own thing. But the 12 traditions are what govern what makes a effective Alcoholics Anonymous group. And the 12 traditions are basically, it's like reading the Constitution. It's like these philosophical guidelines that can be used to be interpreted in a myriad of ways that you could never have predicted. This was done in the 30s, but the rules work in the world of social media now, like in terms of how they promote themselves and how they govern themselves and all these things. And so I've found that there's tremendous value in creating some kind of documented, or like we've used the phrase like house rules, right? And like that sounds a little, maybe a little rough, but like if you create a very clear set of expectations, these are our values, these are our traditions. When we all seek harmony with these traditions, things tend to work well for all of us, right? So like things like, we share responsibly, especially for the finite, scarce resources in our space. We work to ensure that everybody gains fair access to it, right? So like if you're going to sign a membership, coming back to the signing a membership agreement, to say like, I might have somebody check a box after every, major tradition or house rule to say like, look, if like this is a shared space, if one person sits in the biggest conference room by themselves all day, clearly this will not work. It won't work for you because someone else will do it. If you do it, someone else will have whatever, right? So it won't work. So the only way this works is because all of us commit to all of these things. And we won't be perfect, but we seek perfection, right? And so, and we have to be explicit to say, these are the expectations, because people, if you're not, then people will not know. And then you reinforce that through signage. And signage is so important. And that's part of why I included my signage in the toolkit. So you can find that in the, I think in the facilities folder in the Coworking toolkit, printable signage. And we put a lot of thought into stuff like, how do we communicate through signage the expectations in the conference room in a way that doesn't make us sound like nasty old annoying landlord, right? Because if it's like 2-hour limit, you must leave after 2 hours, blah, blah, blah. Like the person who sees that is going to be like, screw you, I'm staying, right? So like, like we don't want to, basically if you treat people like children, they'll start acting like it. If you treat people like adults, they'll start acting like it too. And so what we want to do is inform people and assume that they are grown-ups who will act like grown-ups if you ask them to. And look, sometimes it means somebody doesn't get it, or they don't read the sign, or they're just really stressed out and they have a long list of phone calls throughout the day. We had a lot of headaches with this at Newark City with like people who were building startups, and so much of their job was like doing stuff on the phone. There's just a lot of project management, whatever. And like one of my best friends, who was one of my best supporters, who runs his own agency, was like, look, I don't know what to do because we really need more phone time than we can reasonably be expected to consume in this space. And he actually he designed a phone booth for the space specifically so that his team could have more phone booth time in our space. And that kind of attitude is helpful, even if they're, abusing it. They're saying like, look, we don't want to abuse it. We want to try to figure out what to do. Let's work something out. And that's really coming back to all of this legal stuff, is coming back to relationships with people in the space and communication. Yeah, Serene?
Question. So something I think really brilliant that you pointed to, any abuse to the space, and abuse that could be interpreted up for two. If let's just say there's that constantly happening, does that kind of point to the demand, and there's a higher demand than supply, and that's kind of why it's happening? So creating a solution of maybe interviewing and understanding why the abuse is happening. I hate to use that word, but just for the sake of this conversation, it's because people need more space. So we need to expand here. there's like it sounds like there's something in the background and the symptom of it is coming up as abusing the space. Yeah.
That's a really good point. So when we were in our first space, we had 25 desks and 1 conference room. And we had people literally, it was a large building, so there was a hallway. We had people lining the hallways and actually fighting over corners of the hallway to take their phone calls. Not fighting over, but like I would want to take a call and go to that like corner by the stairwell. And I was like, shit, someone's already on a conference call there. You know, like, clearly we screwed that up, right? Like we didn't know the demand and whatever. So absolutely, that's why this is a dialogue. So if you're noticing consistent, what you would interpret as misuse of your resources, maybe it's because people actually genuinely need your resources more than you expected, right? And I would say, just for the sake of this conversation, especially if you have control over this in your next space or you have an open one yet, err on the side of more phone rooms. And I would say trending where we're going with remote work. When we did it, we had calculated it was 10 desks to 1 phone room or conference room. I would say I would take that down to 8 at least now. And, you know, people don't need luxury. They just need a place to be able to have a private conversation. So that one in particular tends to be one of the most common, you know, cultural like stressor points. And you don't want someone taking a call in the middle of the space pissing everybody off, because that's going to drive everybody crazy. So that's like one of the most obvious sticking points. And conference rooms, you know, it becomes territorial. People get stressed out. I thought there was going to be a room available. I have a big important meeting with my client, and now I'm sitting on a couch somewhere because I got shut out of the conference room, right? So like it leads to a lot of rivalries and stress, and so we want to get away from that as much as we can. But I will also add, Serena, I think the fluidity of this conversation is important, that we're setting guidelines, we're setting traditions, or whatever you want to call it, but we're also knowing that this is a living project that is going to be evolving, and it's imperfect. So we're seeking to better. And, you know, this is also a good reason to put on your calendar. And I really strongly recommend everybody do this right away. Set your anniversary party every year for right around when you opened, or it doesn't have to be on the day of, but around there. Set, you know, some kind of 6 months off of that, some kind of major check-in of some kind. Maybe it's some other party. And then maybe set some kind of quarterly thing, which doesn't have to be public. It could be amongst a smaller group of people, but maybe it is public, where you do some kind of a temperature check. How are we doing? Let's revisit our core values. Let's revisit our traditions. Let's revisit our rules, right? And then as you go throughout the year, and you could do this like on a monthly or weekly basis with your team as well. But as you go throughout the year, if you say, okay, first Monday of every quarter, we're going to sit down and we're going to go over how everything's doing. And we can have like a notepad file, like a shared Google Doc or something, that all the staff and maybe even some of your super members have access to, where it's like, if something sucks and is broken, dump it in this document and we will keep an eye on it. And if we can fix it right away, great. If we can't fix it right away, then on a quarterly basis, we're going to pull up the document. We're going to look at everything. We're going to talk about everything and see if there's something we have to do. And if like this, on the top of that document every quarter is there's people sitting in the hallway on their phones, as a business person, you might have to decide, you know what, it's time to move. We have to make a very high level, big, important business decision that this space doesn't work for us anymore and we got to start looking for a new one. And that's not one that you make on the whim when, you know, in the middle of a random Tuesday when someone's yelling at you, but it's something that you create space to really sit back and say, okay, what would it look like if we looked for a new space? Right? Like, what would we have to do? How would we approach it? Let's size this up as business people. Because one of the other crazy things, and I see that, you know, this is so important for co-working in particular, is that unless you're at a certain scale, you're probably in your space dealing with the printer running out of ink and the drivers and all of the craziness, but you're also the CEO of your business. And it's really easy to lose track of being CEO when you're caught up in the day-to-day of all the stresses of running your business, trying to get new members, culture and happy hours and the event and stacking chairs and all this other stuff. So we really need to set aside time to put on our CEO hat. And if you've got, somebody said this the other day, I forget what their thing was, but they use the name of what their thing was, but like your fortress of solitude, your getaway, your favorite lake, your cabin in the woods. Like you need like it could be like a park bench, right? But like, I think it would make a huge difference if you already know this, great. If you don't know it, like maybe go take a walk and find one. Your place where you go and you have a good think, right? And like, like if you like whiskey and you want to go to your favorite whiskey bar and you sit in the corner, you have your favorite whiskey and that's where you think, great. If it's a cabin in the woods, if it's the Caribbean, like whatever it is, somewhere where you go and that's when you have your business think, right? And you do your writing, whatever it is. And you got to make a commitment to do that at least a couple times a year, twice a year, right? That you go to that place. And Google Calendar is really helpful for this, by the way, or whatever calendar you use. You put in a recurring entry that's just have this recur on the first Monday of, every February or whatever it is, right? The first Monday of each of these months. And then it's sitting in your calendar. It's blocked out. You can't book meetings during that time, right? And if it's like your anniversary party or something, it's easy for you to have that blocked out. And then your staff can say like, oh, Penny, I see that we have our anniversary party coming up next month on, Wednesday the 16th. Is that right? And you're like, oh, shoot. Well, I actually forgot. But now that you mention it, yeah, let's throw a party that day. And like, maybe that day's not good, but you make it the 17th, whatever, it's already there for you. So like, let the calendars work for you and let yourself work for the calendar a little bit on that. And then that'll help you deal with big macro issues that you don't want to let get away from you. And I'll also add, I'm on a rant here, so stop me if you need me to, but this is important when you start looking, and we don't talk about this a lot, on the exit end. And most of you are on the early end of your tenure as co-working space owners. But honestly, I think there's no such thing as too early to think about exit, because one day every one of you will no longer be a co-working space owner. And that might be a long, long time from now. But the more that you understand your relationship to your business is finite, and there will be a time when you will stop running your space. And the more you understand the options about how that might go down, and the more likely you will be able to navigate the process in the healthiest way possible and anticipate situations that could result in things going not as well as you would hope. So if you're like running a little business and it's going okay, but you know that you don't want to be doing this forever, it might take you a few years to implement an exit strategy that is ideal for you and for your business. Because it might involve selling to another co-working space in town that currently you don't have a good relationship with, right? It might involve like finding a new business partner that can take it up. There's these kind of, it might involve like finding a mega investor to help you scale it up, right? There's all these things. Maybe you want to create a co-op or a board of people that owns the community. Susan in Office Nomads in Seattle is doing this now. They've been in business for 12 years and she wants out. And she knows that she would like for it to exit through cooperative ownership. But she knows that it's going to take her probably 4 or 5 years for that to happen. So she's been working on it for the last 2 or 3 years, And so it's a long-term thing. And so Rochelle, I'm just going to read your comment since I don't want to try to talk and read at the same time. Since I'm still in the infant stage, my biggest opportunity of growth is community presence. So I've been focused on building a community of like-minded individuals and a business partner if possible. Ideas welcome. Yeah. So like, honestly, even before you've launched, you can think about what is the narrative of this stage of my life going to be like? Because, maybe you're going to sign a 5 or 10 year lease. And, like, let's say like when I signed one of the leases, I was 27. And I remember my dad, he was kind of pushing me on this. He's like, are you sure you want to do this? I'm like, well, I have to. He's like, when this lease ends, you're going to be 32. Like, think about, the commitment you're making to this phase of your life and where are you going to be when the lease ends? And it's important when you think about where do you want to be in your life? And of course, we don't have all the answers. But if we think early on about what could the answers maybe be, what are they definitely not? I don't want to build a WeWork. Maybe, right? Maybe I do. I don't know. But what are my options? Then you start laying the groundwork for that from the very, very beginning. Because if you start early on and you say, okay, there's other people in my town who believe in this, maybe I can work to really create opportunity to get them involved and maybe have them actually take part ownership in this so that I'm not the only owner, because I actually have a passion for filmmaking and I'm just doing this because I really want it to happen, but I don't want to be a proprietor of workspace my whole life. Then you could lay the groundwork from that early on to say, look, like, I'm not going to say this publicly, but to my business partner, like, my plan is to do this for 5 years and then pass it off to some other owners and go make movies, right? So like you can layer that into your plan from early on. And this is another reason why like befriending the other co-working spaces in your town is so important. Even if they're your direct competitors, even if you're poaching members from each other, if you have a relationship, if you can say, look, I don't expect us to be friends, but I think it's important that we be in touch because sometimes we need each other. Sometimes it's useful. And who knows, one day one of us might buy each other, right? Like having that line open could save your ass one day when the landlord comes in and says, I'm selling the building, you're out in 30 days. And all of a sudden that guy when we got kicked out of our first space, we moved in with another co-working space that had just signed a lease and they had way too much room and they were losing a ton of money because they had a bunch of empty space they weren't using. And we actually shared space with another co-working space for 4 months and it saved both of our businesses. And it was awkward, it was weird, and it was strange, and it's still strange, but we saved each other's asses. So maintaining those relationships and cultivating them is how we avoid legal problems. It may be how we put ourselves on track to longevity for the project. And that's a tricky thing. The other thing I'll say, I'm in super rant mode, so just somebody stop me if you want to interject with a question or a comment, but I think this is useful, so I'm going to keep going. One thing I have seen that tends to happen also is that co-working spaces get tied to their founder, just culturally, personality-wise, visibility-wise. It's so much like, oh, Tony, Newark City is you. You are Newark City. You are the heart of it. You're the soul of it, right? And I'm a passionate leader. So people are going to fall in love with my energy and my vision and map that to my business, which is good, but it's dangerous too, because if that makes me feel scared, if I get overwhelmed by the attention, if I start to burn out, then that becomes an existential threat to the longevity of my business. Now, it doesn't mean that I can't find new leadership, but it does mean that if I'm going to find new leadership, I'm going to have to work really smart about doing it. And it's going to probably take me several years to implement. And so thinking in terms of that, and I don't know that there's easy, obvious answers about personality-driven small co-working spaces, but keeping it in mind and thinking about your options over the course of time and looking for opportunities to introduce new leadership and creating that space will help you create room for your own health in the long term. And I will say too that it's really hard to do that if you've already set it up where like you're the boss. There's not a lot of room for other people because it's just, you know, you own the whole thing. You've been the hero of it, but you can still create room for that by expanding the vision of what's possible in your space to make room for new leaders to come in. So for example, my friend Jillian runs this thing called the Joy List here in New York, which I've mentioned before. It's a newsletter with a curated list of events in New York City that help people create real connections to help fight loneliness. And she needs help because she's on her own. She's very early into entrepreneurship. She needs help figuring out how to really turn it into a healthy business. But she is the Joy List. Everyone knows Jillian is the Joy List. She's the hero. She writes the newsletter every week. Everyone loves her. So how does she make room for a business partner to come in and help her with her business? Well, in her case, the Joy List is just a newsletter in New York City. And it's not really much of a business right now. So when I came in to help her with it, I knew from the start, because I've been in this position, I can't come in and expect I'm going to own a piece of what she's built. It just doesn't work that way. But then when we talk about, well, Joy List is in New York. What about other cities? She's like, actually, I've got a long list of people who are emailing me saying they want to expand the Joy List to their city, but I have no idea how to do that. Then I say, okay, well, maybe I can help you with that. And we say, okay, Jillian is the hero of Joy List NYC, but Joy List Global is new territory, right? And even just talking about what's possible with Joy List Global is like, it's a new business. It's a new business that is separate really from what Joylist NYC is. She could own 100% of that forever, but still have a business partner in terms of this new space that we expand into around what's possible. With a physical space, that may manifest in a larger space, but it may manifest in a larger mission. So if you decide, for example, that you have an awesome person in town that you've maybe been hosting, the obvious example that I love is like someone who's starting like a code school for folks from like a underserved background or something like that, which is like a kick-ass cause, really empowers economically, people who are coming from disenfranchised populations, whatever. They're maybe going for a grant. They're trying to build up their program. If they get the grant that they need and they're going to build a space, you could end up partnering with them on like a project, which is like the center for, code, center for like technical training for people from underserved backgrounds in your city, which is a bigger mission than your little co-working space. And that's room for a partnership, right? And now, like, even if you were like the queen of your co-working space, there's now a new kingdom that you get to be a part of together, and there's room for new leadership to fill that space. All of that happens over the course of years, because that deal that you do with that co-working, with that code school founder, that might happen here, but that conversation started way the hell back here, maybe 2 years, maybe 10 years before. And so we're always looking and laying that foundation. So I will wrap up this rant by saying, as we are constantly looking for relationships to help us with our co-working space, we're looking for someone who works at the beer company to give us cheap beer or free beer. We're looking for somebody who give us pro bono legal counsel, even if it's only once in a while. We're looking to cultivate relationships with the problem members that we're worried about so that they don't sue us, right? And that we learn how to communicate. But honestly, we're also thinking about who within all of our spectrum of contacts am I keeping a little tab on, as this person might be the person who's running my space one day, right? Or this person might be a part of the board that takes over, right? And you just keeping that in mind. And those are people you want to, maybe they're like, you start talent spotting when you're in a co-working space too, where you see somebody's like really like they've got it, right? They're like driven and they're talented and they're passionate, but their business might not be the one that makes it. It's like the thing they're trying to do is just, maybe it's not going to work. At some point, it might be years later, they're going to be making a transition. Maybe they sell their startup to a company, the company sucks, they quit. Now you got some kick-ass, talented, driven, awesome person who's in between gigs, and you're like, all right, this is why I'm keeping in touch. I got to get this person on, like, I want to see if there's a way I can snap this person up, get them on board, right? So you kind of keeping tabs on those really special people who could save you one day. Because one day, one of them might. Okay, rant over. Where do we go from here? Comments?
First of all, you're killing it, and that's all I wanted to say.
Thanks, Serene. Thank you. What of what I've said connects to something that is alive for any of you right now in terms of your worlds? Where can we go from here?
Yeah, so I just met with a client, and he owns a networking group. And he wants to be in our space. He wants our physical location to be home to his networking group in our area. And we were talking about, he actually brought one of his new facilitators to the meeting. And part of the conversation was, what does it really look like to initiate a group? And we talked about that her group, she wants it to have a particular flavor. We talked about it being like ice cream, like networking is cream and sugar and frozen, right? And each group or each networking organization has its own flavor. We got pistachio over here, almond over here, coconut. And some people may not like those particular flavors of networking, but if we know, hey, you like this is where you can go for that. And I could see that would be what partnering up with the other co-working spaces would be like when we interview somebody who needs a space. Our flavor might not be right for them, but we could always pass them on to somebody else. And knowing what our flavor is helps us target who we're reaching out to in terms of inviting and having people come check out our space, explore what it is, and it actually will help us streamline the onboarding process to be a match for what it is that we're looking for. So it's really important to know yourself and your own flavor to have that process really work. And I really thank you for bringing that to the.
Yeah, and you know, it's thank you, Michelle, for illustrating it that way, because it's so helpful. And I can put it in really concrete terms, right? If you're like the fun local co-working space, it's a little bit, you know, a little bit funkier. And there's like the suits and tie, like business center dudes who are maybe like appropriating the co-working language, and we kind of don't really like them, but they're here. It is what it is, right? Those people are culturally different. And if you get business suit person to come into your space and you think that they're going to be on sales call, cold sales calls all day or whatever, it's like, this guy's not going to be a fit. I don't want him here. When they come in, you can say like, hey, have you checked out Business Suit Corp Center yet? You know, and the guy's like, well, no, but I was thinking about it. Like, are you really sending me to somebody else? I'm like, well, look, you choose what's right for you. But just so you know, I'm getting a vibe like you might really love it over there. So if you want to come back and talk to me, great. But I wouldn't sign up here unless you check that place out first, right? And now these guys that you don't like, and maybe they treat you like a competitor and a threat too. If some business suit guy goes to Business Suit Center and you send them business, all of a sudden, even if they never trust you, even if they never acknowledge it, they're like, wow, they sent us business. Like, that's cool. You know, it's a nice little sign, a little show of, and I mean, the gangster thing to do is then you send them an email and say like, hey, just met Business Suit dude, sent him your way. I think it'd be a great fit for you. So if it works out, great. I hope it works out for you guys. And like, no response needed, not asking for a finder's fee, although that would be cool too. And you know, you know, but then like, again, they don't ever have to trust you. They don't ever have to talk to you, but in their head, like, you're going to scratch their belly. You send them a nice customer, like, it's pretty hard for them to totally hate you if you're giving them money, you know? So another way to kind of break
that. Then you get to cultivate. What's funny is in that action, you get to cultivate a community over competition. It starts emerging even in places where that may not be the case, just by being the change that you want to see in the world. That's so cool.
I mean, business suit guy is more likely to speak highly of you. Business suit corp space is going to be less likely to speak down of you, right? So like, and it's so easy with these little rivalries to come up. I mean, I don't know how many times in New York City, competition capital of earth, that I've been asked like, ooh, like, what about, you know, the alley? Like, they just raised 5 million. What do you think of them? You know? And I'm like, good for them. Like, they're not my vibe, you know, whatever. Jason's a cool guy. You know, like, it is what it is. Like, it's business, you know? But like, you know, so if I don't perpetuate it and I try to be magnanimous, then I'm sending good vibes out. And like, I don't know, maybe Jason, even if he is super competitive, even if he did poach my members that one time, right? Like, he's going to speak. He's spoken highly of me in public settings and said like, Tony's the guy who started it here. Like, much respect. And I will, oh man, you got me ranting today. If you're the first one in your city, or if you're like the visible, like, leader of co-working in your city, there's all these jealousy things that go on when there's other people coming up. And you might be the jealous person of the other person who's like the established, like, co-working guru of your city or whatever. Just notice those power dynamics at play. And again, the magnanimity comes all the way through here. So
having a co-working space is like having a mini country to run. That's what it's sounding like, really.
It's all politics. It's all, I mean, it really, it is. And the more politicking is about, you know, cultivating support and recognizing there will be people with differing views, but you can have.
Oh, Tony, wait, I'm going to interrupt. I want to hear, I don't know if Jen has anything to say. I wanted to hear from her.
Yes, please. Jen, we just wanted to, Serene was just wondering if you had anything to share, because you haven't spoken up and you're awesome.
As far as making friends with other people, yeah, I mean, I'm all for it. Before we opened, we did a grand tour of all the other co-working spaces around here. And I have definitely sent, honey, please. I've definitely sent Business Suit Guy to Business Suit Central, and we've made friends with them. And I'm actually really thankful that they're around, because then we don't have to take Business Suit Guy. So,
that's brilliant.
The other nice thing about getting to know the places around is to know where not to send your members. Like, if I've got somebody who's doing a sales call out in like the northwest suburbs, I know that there's one place I will tell them to avoid, because it's like a-hole central, let alone Business Suit Central. and then conversely, I'm like, oh my gosh, 25N in Arlington Heights, love Mara Hausers, go over there. So yeah, it's good to know the buddies. And actually, there's another suburb, there's a couple of suburbs I've got my eye on for expansion, and there's another place that just opened like this week, and I'm looking at it, and it's like they clearly did not do Newark cities, because their marketing is just so off the mark. But yeah, I'm trying to find the owner on LinkedIn so that I can befriend her, because if they go down, I want to pick it up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you might be able to be a huge benefit to them if they have to like sell off their furniture, and you can take a bunch of heavy stuff off their hands that you'd get for pennies on the dollar. There's all kinds, again, like all these advantages. And hey, wouldn't you love to be friends with the co-working space that's shutting down and has to figure out where to send their members?
Or you can take over that space and now you have location.
Yeah, again, like an already operating, built out location, right? That you can get for pennies on the dollar, right? So many advantages, magnanimity. And I'll say, like, just coming back from the high level for this conversation, when we're talking about, and it's so funny, this all started because Lucas dropped in for 5 minutes and asked about, is a digital signature as good as a paper signature? But all the way back from there to here, yeah, competition, members that might be in trouble, all of these different things, it comes back to our humanity and the humanity of our members and the fact that we're all people on a journey. So even like the other co-working space founder that you despise, who is maybe acting unethically, like they're on their own karmic journey, they're dealing with their own pain and their own situation, and like everybody's dealing with their stuff, including us. And if we focus on being, seeking being good people and cultivating a sense of love and connection and caring and decency and just good stuff amongst our communities, amongst our people, then it doesn't matter if WeWork or whatever mecca WeWork is going to replace them in this coming decade, whatever. It doesn't matter if they come across the street and they try to poach all your members. If you focus on being awesome and you stay on that course and don't let all of this stuff distract you too much, then you're going to be fine. And that's really how this works. And the beauty of our spaces, your spaces, is that within your walls, you have a tremendous amount of agency over how that goes down. And you get to define culture. One of the things I told the people who worked at my front desk was, look, we get people who come in who don't get it. We get people who come in who've never heard of co-working before, who have never been to a space before, who don't understand how it works here. And we're going to show them a different way of doing business. And even if they never pay, if they never join, if they come on one tour and they think it's weird and they leave, they're going to see a different way of the world working, right? Like, we trust each other here. We trust each other not to steal the ink out of the paper printer. We trust each other to look after each other's stuff and share responsibly. And you might have come from a corporate context where everyone backstabs, and you might not be conscious of the fact that it's possible for people to live this way. But in this little teeny corner of the planet, that's how it works. And so we get to define that. And you know what? We can be a little funky about it. We could try stuff that doesn't work. or we could try stuff that seems a little bit weird or a little bit, what's the word, eccentric, right? But it's ours. And part of the benefit you get from doing the crazy thing of signing a lease and going through all of this craziness is that it's yours. And so you get to decide. And part of what I loved about running my own co-working spaces, I got to decide what I put up on the walls. I got to decide what weird, crazy parties we threw. And like, we did really random fun stuff, and it wasn't that weird. And we got to decide what we did, and we got to do stuff nobody else ever would have done. And that helps nourish our souls. So I'd say, if I throw one more piece of advice at you just from today.
That was like the magic word right there. Nourish our souls. Yes.
Well, I'll say, like,
best $99 I've spent in my life.
If you get to throw one party a year or do one really crazy thing a year that nobody ever would have done and you never would have been able to do if you didn't have your own space, that might buy you more years of running your space, and help you get through the time when the printer doesn't work for all day, right? So like, that's why I think it's important when you go to your cabin in the woods, quarterly, find some, listen for those moments when something really silly and fun happens, and freaking do it even if it doesn't make sense. Because those are the memories you're going to cherish when you don't have your space anymore.
Oh, man.
Oh, yes, my God, what a call.
You feel like wanting to open a new co-working space, Tony? I'm kidding.
No.
Maybe.
No, I'm not doing it. I will say, though, if I were to ever be involved in a co-working space project again in New York City, and I'm not saying that I'm not testing the waters on this, the way that you do it is that, the way that I would do it is that, first of all, I'm not signing the lease. I'm not in charge, but it's moving the chess pieces. So like, I know some people who are trying to get a new space going. I maybe know people who need a new office. Maybe there's a way to arrange the chess pieces so that a new space happens that I get to like help with, right? Because I can't be the guy with the bullseye on my back anymore, but maybe I can help out. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Tony. This was great. Really appreciate you making the time.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I don't know. I'm glad it worked out today. I'm glad this was useful to you.
No, this is a good call. It gave me a lot to think about.
Yeah. And let me know if you end up, going somewhere with it. I think it would be awesome. Maybe we could do like a workshop one day of like creating our core values or traditions. And, it could be like a fun little workshop thing we do.
Another thing is it confirms some of the things I have been thinking about, like how long will I own this and stuff, and so it is nice, Tony, when you talk about things and it confirms that I've already been thinking in a good direction, and I actually find that pretty helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really important, and it helps you understand where you're at when you get lost in it, during this time. You think, and again, you can always change your mind, but if you have some thinking, some frame of mind around how this could go down, that helps. And, when I did it, there were no precedents. I mean, there were other business precedents, but not in co-working. I didn't have models to follow. And honestly, there still aren't a lot. We still don't have a lot of good stories of long-term exits that we could like model after. But I think there are more examples we can start to look towards. Certainly a lot more anti-examples that we could at least use to help as a starting point of what we don't want. Yeah.
Before we go, I'm sorry, Jen, were you going to say something? Because you're unmuted.
No.
Okay. I want to put this in now for the next call, just so people's brains can go to work on it. Something that has been very much in my face, because it'll be something we'd have to address soon, is the operational manual for our space, like the turn-by-turn directions for staff and for members, and more so for staff, of how to run the space and what, you cash out here and you close the door there and you open that window there and you lock that door here. I just kind of, I want some feedback and direction on where to start and how to go about it. Because I've done a lot of research online, but it's very cookie cutter, and I know, every building has its own way of operating. So I'd love people's feedback next time on that if we can go that direction.
I will tell you just real quick. First of all, do you know we have a employee manual template in the toolkit, so you know, helps. But two is, because documenting how you run your space is such an involved process that it's a lot. It's hard to do like just by sitting down and doing it. So one thing we implemented that I really recommend is a shared Google Doc, which one of my employees created. It was her idea and it was genius, called the Captain's Log. And the Captain's Log is anything that goes into running the space that isn't documented, that needs to be documented. And it's just a big messy list of just like, you know, like the PIN code for the eFax, whatever, right? It's like, it just goes in there, right? And then when you have your quarterly or whatever, you go through everything there and say, okay, how do we pull this into the formal document? So you basically have the formal document, and then you have like, what did we miss? And you just dump everything in there, and everyone on the team has access to that. So you just dump.
Okay,
good starting point.
I would
great place to start.
What was that?
Oh, I just said that's a great place to start. Yes. Yeah. Give you a start for now, but we could talk more about it next week.
I wouldn't worry about putting it together before your space opens. Like, just open your space and write everything down, like Tony said, and your operations manual will develop from there, because there'll be stuff that happens that you wouldn't have even anticipated.
Got it.
Although I will say, if you start it now with whatever you have now, it's a great starting point to say, like, okay, maybe you don't put your passwords in there, but like, we have, you know, we manage our, you know, our email is through Google Apps. Our, you know, our domain name is registered through GoDaddy. Like, you start documenting just like the things that you have now.
Basic outlines, yeah.
Yeah, because even something like, who gets the email when somebody emails info@myspace.com, right? Like, who gets that email, and like, where is that managed? Would I have to add a new employee to it? Where do I go to manage that, right? So like, you can start documenting those things now, so it's tiny. But then, as Jen says, like, when you start opening your space, you start making a lot of decisions, a lot of things start getting documented. And it's nice if in that moment you think, oh, this is something that I need to get out of my brain and into a document, and I have a place to put it. Let me put it in this one master document. And it can be a mess right now, but just like, start dumping stuff as you go, right? Our landlord's name and phone number is this, you know? Yeah.
So then you get the contact list going too. And my brain I have a very structural brain. So it already works in that manner. So I love that got reconfirmed, but I love what you said was two things. Jen, basically, don't worry about everything right now. That relieves a lot of stress for me. And two, I love what you said, Tony, that we can do it together, because I was kind of taking it on like it's gonna be like one of us is gonna have to take it on, and it's a lot for one person to take on. But it can be a group thing that could be kind of take the chess pieces and move it around and pull from the captain's list, as you said.
And the way that you guarantee that this is a problem is if you think, oh my God, this is a lot of work. I really have to sit down and do this, but it's going to be a lot of work and it's really stressful. And then you end up putting it off for years and years and years. And then it ends up becoming a problem, right? So you try to de-stress it by just, dump it one bit at a time. And then you can do a big cleanup later, but get it documented in one place and have everyone chip into it.
Got it. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Y'all are the best. Go change lots of lives. Feed your souls. Throw weird parties.
Yeah. Weird parties will do. Bye. Bye, Rochelle. Bye, everyone.
See you in a week. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Bye.